Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual breakfast sessions. I'm Larry Sashin. Oh, today we have interesting guests, an even more interesting topic. Everybody in business has their plan A, has their plan B, but how do you base plan when your foundation is on an earthquake pattern and it's shaking back and forth? And that's what we get every day. So before we go into our topic and our introductions, let's thank our sponsor, ERA Group, Capital Conservation. We all work so very, very hard to make money. As some wise man once said, it's not what you make, it's what keep. And let Ed Flanagan and ERA make sure that the price in that invoice is right. So if you're interested in capital conservation, call Ed Flanagan and the ERA Group. So back to our show. Before we start, why don't we introduce ourselves? Charles, say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. I did what you told me to do.
Okay, good. Little bit further than that.
I'm Charles Dorn. I'm the managing director of the Dorn Group. We are a consulting firm based in Westchester County that specializes in private clubs, primarily, a little bit of work in other areas, but we do strategic planning, operational consulting, and executive search for chefs and general managers as well.
Say that 3 times fast.
I couldn't say it once.
Okay. Fred, say hello.
Good morning. I'm Fred Clashman. I'm the editor and publisher of Total Food Service. Welcome, everybody.
Okay, so back to our top. Charles, how does a club manager plan for what's going on in Washington now?
Well, how many weeks do we have to answer that question?
A little bit shorter. Good.
It's to your point and where you started the show, it's obviously not an easy subject. The one advantage private clubs have philosophically is they do have a user base. Obviously, people have spent money to join a private club. Often when we go through things like recessions and uncertainty, people tend to use their club as much, if not in some cases more, depending on the economic situation, than they might in commercial restaurants, just from a comfort level. That being said, private clubs at the moment have not been affected quite as much as what's going on in Washington as the commercial side. But it's going to happen. There's no question about it. I think to your question about planning, great private clubs do two things. They operate under what we've chosen to call a COO model, where the general managers are chief operating officers and the boards and committees themselves do not make operational decisions, and they in fact make policy and decision-making decisions. If you're doing that's the great opportunity for number one, or the thing that sets the ship straight at the beginning. The second thing that private clubs started doing about, I would say, 15, 20 years ago is developing strategic plans. And having a strategic plan for your business allows you to make changes that follow the structure and the definition and the DNA of your business. For example, I know a lot of clubs through the country, starting, as I said, about 20 years ago, started developing strategic plans. They're geared towards typically a 10-year time frame, and they establish 6, 8, 10 objectives. And in a well-run club, every year the board sits down, actually reviews those 6, 8, 10 objectives and says, how can we move the needle on each one? But it also allows them in times of uncertainty and times of change to shift. And it might very well be that when you wrote the strategic plan 10 years from now, you want a new clubhouse. In the old days, you'd do it at year 9, and then you'd assess the members, and the members would freak out and you'd lose a lot of members. What happens today is if you do make that decision knowing it's 10 years off, every year you'll do something to move the needle. So in year 1, you might do nothing more than select the architect. In year 2, you might get a very preliminary design, just enough to know the magnitude of the project. And again, nothing specific's been designed, but if you know it's a $15 million project at the end of year 2, you can actually sit down and make the decisions on how you're going to fund it at year 2. And if it's a matter of assessments, you could start assessing members in year 3, so that by the time it comes to year 8, when you're going to build whatever it is, half the money in the bank, 3/4 of the money in the bank, or you've gotten the loan from the bank or some hybrid of those, when you have that kind of stability, the things that are happening in Washington today don't affect it quite as much on one hand, but no different than commercial establishments. We're all dealing with some of the crises of today. I mean, the biggest one at the moment is uncertainty, but specifically the avian flu. When you start to see what's happened throughout the country and the fact that the avian flu is not just affecting eggs. It's now been discovered this week or last week in cattle, and who knows how far that will spread. Certainly crescent duck out on Long Island is a classic example of a business that's has had horrible things because of the avian flu. They lost, I think it's 96,000 birds, really had to shut down. At some point will hopefully come back, but one of the biggest duck producers in the United States. So I probably didn't answer your question, but that got me started.
Yeah, you're right. You didn't answer the question. I mean, we
All right,
have
so
many.
I just want to jump in for a second. So based on your trip last week, one of the things about the timing today is the Club Managers Association had their annual convention last week, and you were there. Talk about how, with the answer you just gave, what were some of the topics that were discussed that sort of feed into that club managers, they look at going into their season, et cetera, are concerned with?
I think probably the two things, and the first won't surprise anybody on the call, is labor. Labor obviously has been an issue for everyone. Rising labor costs. Club boards that don't really know the ins and outs will typically say, well, we don't want to pay someone $20 an hour or $25 an hour because they're used to the historical lower numbers. And the reality is that the restaurant down the street is paying $30 an hour. Labor is absolutely number one. Rising food costs. And there's always been an issue in the private club industry. And I'll be the first to admit I've never understood it. There's sometimes members honestly believe when they walk in and have dinner or lunch and they look at the price of a menu item, they expect it to be the same quality as the best restaurant down the street and less cost. So, well, I'm a member and it should be. And the answer is really, that's not true. It's not a legitimate argument. I was at a client recently who, for example, was doing a prefix dinner and the prefix was tied into the price of the center of the plate item. I look at the prefix prices and it looked great to me. I remember there was a pork chop and everything came with it. The first course, choice of first course, the entree, and I don't think it was dessert. I think it was 2 courses. And the price of the pork chop was like $56. Okay, but it was a really nice pork chop. I heard the member complain to the manager, how can you charge $56 for a pork chop? And they named some other restaurant that was charging $50 for it. And I kind of looked at him and said, well, with all due respect, you're getting a choice on the first course. You had a cocktail hour at the beginning where you paid for your alcohol, but we did all the hors d'oeuvres. And so if you kind of added up the a la carte prices, that probably in that restaurant would have been, $70 or $75. And the man literally said, okay, I get it. And the general manager told me a week later that he came back the next week and complained about, the item the next week. And it was the same thing. They don't get it. The going rate on a cocktail in a New York City commercial restaurant today is $20, $21, $22, and you charge $17 sometimes in a club. Oh my goodness, no cocktail should be $17. So there's always a pricing issue or a pricing perception issue, I should say, in private clubs. And that's certainly something that is concerning everybody because as prices rise and you have no choice but to raise prices or cut portions, we're not going to cut quality. There's really only 3 things you can do. And so you kind of have your hands tied.
Do you think it's a result of the fact that most restaurants today use social media aggressively to sell what they perceive as value, yet a club would never think of using social to market to its own membership? Is it time to take another look at how you market to your own membership?
There is a significant amount of social media work going on in private clubs, but they're all in private networks. Again, recognizing that any membership is a bell curve, we have people in their, let's just say, over 55 for whom social media is not what it is for those under 55. And of course, there's lots of people at over 55 who are heavily in social media, but there are a lot that's not or are not. And so if you get communication from the club, and whether it's on one of the private platforms or it's a private group within one of the public platforms, sometimes they just don't look at it. And then also, you have to be very careful what I call the M word. You say, we're going to market. Oh, we don't need to market. We're a private club. People come. Well, if you join the club, if you're in your 60s and you join the club early on, you probably grew up in the club world one way or another. Your parents were members or friends were members. A lot of the people that are joining private clubs today are a totally different ilk. A lot joined during the pandemic. Average ages of memberships have come down drastically. And so as a result, that's the other big problem, Fred, going back to your question, the bell curve has changed dramatically. The wants and the needs of the left side of the bell curve is so totally different than the group on the right side that we sometimes struggle. And so going back to your question about what the problems are, how do you build a menu that keeps a young family with 2.5 kids happy who are coming in on the fly. On the other end of the spectrum, a group of members who are in their 60s and 70s that really at lunch want a half a sandwich and a cup of soup, and they don't want, quote unquote, anything fancy. I was with a China distributor, well, China glass and silver actually, at Club Manager Show, and we were talking about this. And so all the incredible stuff this company has, actually, I'll give a little plug, Mikasa Hospitality, that has actually recently reinvigorated itself. The old CEO of Bauscher China has taken over Mikasa Hospitality. And Mikasa is a totally different company than we all remember 8 years ago. They had incredible amounts of glass and real unusual shapes. But the one thing they still have to sell is round white china, because there are always going to be people who kind of demand it. And so I remember in my days at the Union Club, I had members that said, I don't want a plate shaped like an eye. I don't want a plate that's colored. I want a round white plate. And so you have to keep it. If you think about things like hamburgers in a private club, you have the group, the senior group, who wants a tomato on their hamburger in February when the only tomatoes have white cores because they're grown in a greenhouse. And you have a group on the other end who doesn't even eat hamburgers. They only eat sliders. And it's got to be Kobe beef and Cabot, aged cheddar on one, and then something unique on the other two.
No, it's interesting because no matter what staid industry there is, right now, most of them is still geared to deal with boomers. The problem with dealing with boomers is they're not making us anymore. You have to start reaching down into the lower age group. So how does a club do that?
Well, I mean, going back to the point about what I was making about hamburgers, the menu and the offerings have to be personalized. And if I was to say there's one thing that club food programs do better than most, is personalization, whether it's flavor profiles, whether it's variety. And we all know that in the commercial side, there are chefs that are famous for saying, I'm making no change. That entree is what that entree is, and I will not make any change. If we did that in the private club world, the chef would be fired, the general manager would be fired, the food and beverage director would be fired, and that would go. So whether it's portion size, whether it's flavor profiles, whether it's menu variety, we do everything we can to make members happy. And it sounds so cliche, but we don't say no. We deal with allergens on a level that most commercial restaurants would not. Somebody's on a keto diet and they're coming to the club once or twice a week. Chef has no choice to understand what a keto diet is and prepare things properly. If somebody says, no, does this contain gluten? Yes, the obvious question is it a lifestyle or is it an allergen? Giving them what they want when they want. I think the one thing that we're seeing more and more of in clubs is a little bit more all-day dining. We're getting away from fixed meal periods. So again, depending on how somebody's using the club, there is something available to them all the time. In the old days, lunch ended at 2:30 and dinner began at 6. And now, with the way people's lives have changed post-pandemic, we now have people that come to the club at 2:00 and maybe they want to grab a bite before they play golf. And obviously not this time of year. I wouldn't want to try to play golf today. Again, we need to have plenty of things for them to eat at that point. Of the old bar menu of 3 or 4 items at 2:00 in the afternoon does not cut it anymore. When you look at something seemingly as simplistic as a snack bar, I think if I were to bring 10 chefs in here and 10 general managers from private clubs and I say, what's the one facet of your operation that drives you nuts? The answer is the snack. Okay, call it a snack bar, call it a halfway house, whatever you want. Every winter, you have a group of people that say, we want healthier selections at our snack bar. And the chef spends the winter and he writes a great new menu and he's got all these incredible things. The first week it opens, it's great. And the second week, people start to gravitate to chicken fingers and French fries. And by week 5, the healthy stuff is gone. Nobody wants it. It's the middle of the summer. They're going back to the big fat burgers and they're going back to the kids and back to chicken fingers and French fries. Is it worth making your own chicken fingers in the middle of the summer? Absolutely not. But you got to find the right quality. And that was the other part of that answer. Quality is king in private clubs. I have a client who I won't mention who does roughly 1,000 covers a day on a busy Saturday or Sunday in the summer. And I am not being facetious when I tell you 500 of them are chicken fingers and fries because they're kids. So if you were to think that they were going to cut their own fries or they were going to bread their own chicken, excuse the expression, but it ain't happening. But they worked long and hard to find a honey-coated chicken tender that made everybody happy, and it's not ground chicken. Same thing with the fries. They went through processing years ago, picked the fry they like, and they're not changing it.
So does this change the approach to the food distribution vendors that you're now looking for? In other words, it seems to me as if you've now challenged the vendor community with a very different set of parameters.
Well, I mean, that's always always been that way, Fred, if you think about it. I mean, there's always, from a chef's perspective, there's always, do I buy it pre-made? Do I buy it in the raw state? Do I buy it in some sort of process state? Because it's the trade-off with labor and time in order to do it. And I'm sure Ed would agree with the same thing. Finding the right product that fits your needs is not easy at times. Sometimes, yeah, but if you turned around and I'll hypothetically say Cisco because it's the name everybody knows, but if you have a great relationship with your Cisco rep and you sit with he or she and say, this is what I'm looking for in the right scenario, they want to be your partner. And maybe that's the better way to answer your question. We more and more look for partners, whether it's a farmer that's raising stuff, whether you're buying from Chef's Warehouse in New York or you're buying from Chef's Garden out in Ohio. If you've never seen what Chef's Garden does, Chef's Garden out in Ohio is one of the largest producers of specialty produce in the United States, and they ship to chefs and restaurants, of course, and clubs, and hotels all around the country. I was recently in their packing room. I literally recognized 40 or 50 people or restaurants, things were going to. And I saw some of the biggest restaurants in the country, some of the highest ends, like Alinea in Chicago. He was buying miniature this or miniature that. And again, to your point, you've got to find the right partner and the right product.
So question, and we keep going back to the pricing and running the show. How does a restaurant, now you have to start planning now that they're going to be more and more increase. So what happens if they throw a 25% tax on everything from Canada and all of a sudden tomatoes go up 25%? Different products, your liquor goes up 25%. Everything goes up. How do you deal? There is no cushion anymore in restaurant and in clubs. How do you deal with it at that point?
Well, I mean, the first question is there an alternative? Obviously, is there an alternative available? Some things there are, some things there are not. I mean, for example, you mentioned tomatoes, but let's look at something different. French wine. Okay. It's just a fact of life. If your membership enjoys French wines, they are going to be more expensive. End of discussion. No one's going to absorb 25%. We might absorb a little bit, but the reality is there is nothing you can do about it. There's not an alternative out there in the case of French wine. There's other wines out there, of course, other great wines. But if you had somebody that's drank French wines all their life and that's all they want to drink, the good thing for us is that they're going to be more expensive in the liquor store. They're going to be, or in the wine store, depending where you shop. They're going to be more expensive everywhere. We're not going to take the same price increases as everybody is, because we know how commercial restaurants price wine. It's different. I think one of the things that starts to get a slightly different conversation about how much money you're looking to make on certain things. So I'll stick with wine for a second. I'm not a fan of just looking at a bottle of wine and doubling it or tripling it. I look at contribution margin. How much money am I making off that bottle of wine? And so, for example, if I buy a bottle of wine for $20, yeah, I might triple it. It might be $60 sale price. But if I buy a bottle of wine for $80, I'm probably not selling it at $240. I'm probably selling it at $200. I might sell it at $185. Because if I make $100 off that bottle and somebody sees that it's under market price, I'm perfectly content making the $100 off the bottle, because then chances are they're going to buy two because I'm under the market. But it gets to really creative pricing. The question is, how many of those items can we alternatively source? So you mentioned tomatoes. Of course, if we're talking about tomatoes in a salad, we still need tomatoes in a salad. Could you, for the sake of discussion, do something different? Could chef create a confit of tomatoes or a confit of sun-dried tomatoes and put that as a topping on his burger instead of having a tomato slice? I think you have to look for alternative product. But the fact that everybody's going to be affected by this, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's what's going on in the egg market. I mean, when you look at Waffle House announcing last week a 50-cent premium on every single egg you order, okay? And Waffle House goes through these unbelievable amounts of eggs. That's going to affect middle America. So by the time the club members get to it, they're going to have seen it too. All you have to do is walk in a grocery store today and look for eggs, and you're not going to find what was there a week ago or even 2 weeks.
Somebody suggested on the radio today that you give your wife a dozen eggs for Valentine's Day because it's rarer and less expensive than $100 bouquet of roses. So times are changing. So if you had any tips for someone that wants to go into the club business, as someone who is, has just started with a club and is doing some planning, what would they be?
Clubs thrive on one thing, and they thrive on the member experience. The member will accept a lesser, I don't want to say quality, but I'll say a lesser level of food and beverage. No one's looking for Le Bernardin or Per Se when they go to their club to have lunch on a Saturday afternoon. But what they're looking for is a good product at a good value. So number one, good value. But number two, great service. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, we are in a service-driven business. And as I told...
That was the first thing we were talking about was in Tampa last week. What was the highlight?
Absolutely. So as a matter of fact, I was at Burns's Steakhouse the other night for dinner, and Burns is world-renowned for its wine list. They make no bones about it. They have 1 million bottles. You go to dinner, and yes, there's an a la carte menu, but there's also their steak menu and some limited entrees. And if you order the steak or the limited entree menu, onion soup comes with it, a salad comes with it, a fresh baked potato comes with it. On your plate with your steak, there are homemade onion rings, shoestring onion rings. In my case, there were string beans, all inclusive in the steak price. So it make it easy for the customer. It's far more than that. It's service driven. So the gentleman that waited on us the other night named John, and John is part of the story, the name John, John told us that when John started at Burns, he had to start in the kitchen. Every single employee starts in the kitchen. It takes anywhere from 1 year to 2 to get out of the kitchen until there's a position open. The joke about the name John is that they only allow one employee to have that name at one time. So there were 2 other guys named John that were there when he got there, but because there had also been somebody before him, they weren't called John. But the original John retired, so when he came, he got the name John. I think it's every 3 to 5 years after you've been there in the front of the house, you earn a different tie color. There are people walking around with burgundy ties, there are people walking around with silver ties. He's got a silver tie. That's about as good as it gets. John was one of the most knowledgeable servers about everything in this restaurant that just knocked the daylights out of it. The attention to detail, when I told him that I was gluten-free, and I said, can you do me a favor? Skip the onion soup, skip the onion rings, and he looked at me and he stopped the conversation. He said, no, sir, you get everything. And then he proceeded to explain to me what the chef did to produce a gluten-free product for me and for everyone else. And then later on, he told me that anytime a ticket comes in that's got an allergen on it, it's a triple ticket, and one of the tickets goes to the executive chef or executive sous chef, and they handle it personally, and they initial it so they can keep track on it. That made me feel, as you can imagine, remarkable. One of the sommeliers came up. We asked for her. She came up and she said, what do you want to drink tonight? Almost in those words. And we said, we like older wines, American or French. We would leave it in your hands. Based on their prices, we said, kind of keep it in the $100 range. And she said, can I go a little further for something great? And we said, sure. We started with a 1978 Côte de Rhône from Jaboulet. We went to a 1981 Montelena Zin. We went to a 1985 Mondavi Cab. And we finished out with a baby 1990 Super Tuscan. The price for dinner per person, including a 25% gratuity and all the wine, was $220 a person. It was so inexpensive. The most expensive bottle of wine was the Mondavi at $150. And that was, a 40-year-old bottle of wine. I can't really complain. When you finish dinner, when you finish your entree, the captain takes you through the kitchen. You walk through the working kitchen. He points out the station where they produce onion rings and tells you that on a busy night, they produce 500 pounds of onion rings, which is mind-boggling. They then take you for a tour of the wine cellar. And when you're looking around at all these wines, he proceeds to tell you that's only 10%. The other 90% is across the street in a warehouse. And then they take you up to the dessert room. And the dessert room is basically a separate restaurant. It's the only way to describe it. What Mr. Burns did, he was an amateur mill worker and metal worker. He actually bought giant wine puncheons. I think they're 600 gallons, stripped off the ends, stripped off the bands, and took the barrel staves, spread them out, and created these miniature small rooms. So we were essentially sitting a barrel. The room was set for 6. It couldn't have handled more than 8. It was incredibly unique. We, at that point, had eaten and drank so much, no one wanted dessert. One guy wanted dessert. Yeah. But I decided to drink dessert, and I drank a 1970 Smith Woodhouse port for $19 a glass. You couldn't get, in the week that Fred mentioned that the club managers were there, you couldn't get a reservation. I mean, you literally, it was sold out, from what I understand, a month ago. I know tons of people that tried to go, but they make it on volume. They make it on service. I would go back there if I was in Tampa tomorrow and not blink. I might not have the dining experience that I did because I turned into the Michelin tire boy, but incredible service. And so back to your question, Larry, it's service. And if people come to the club, get value and they get service, they'll keep coming back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's that time again where we have to pull back the emergency brake and stop. So basically, in my head, you started and ended ended in experience. You went for a meal, but you ended up with an experience. You say, I had a great steak. Well, you didn't say you had a great steak. You hardly
Right.
talk about the food at all. You talked about when in times when there's prices are going up and everything is up in the air, the one thing that must be constant is the experience.
Yeah.
And I think you hit it right on the head. But I'm going to put this in your head right now. I'm coming back to you in a minute for that one point that I want to leave with everybody that comes out of that head of yours. But before we go, I want to thank ERA Group, Ed Flanagan, for paying the bills today. Listen, it's not how much money you make, it's what you keep. If you're interested in keeping that hard-earned cash, call Ed Flanagan, ERA Group, and they will find that gold hidden in those invoices for you. Fred, why don't you say goodbye to people and we'll end with Charles.
Yeah, Charles, thank you. And it's interesting. We didn't get a chance to talk to Mr. Brody, which we'll do in the future, because the one thing we talked about was the importance and impact of labor, on service and on this experience. As I see, frankly, as I see what's going on in Washington with a large amount of people being sent out of the country, good, bad, or indifferent, I start to wonder, where is this next generation of service going to come from? I certainly don't hope it's a dependence on robots and technology. I still hope it continues to be a people-driven industry.
Yes, thank you, Fred. So, Charles, that pearl of wisdom.
Value. Finding the value and the service levels that are right for your property. Every property is different, but people need to walk out having said that was a good experience.
And the one thing we didn't touch on is education. Education. This stuff doesn't just happen. It is a constant education process.
Training.
So this will be another VBS. But Charles, thank you.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with you, Fred. I can't. I don't think it is training. I think Larry's right. I think it's a different word. I think it's education.
Okay.
I think that
What's the difference between the two?
I think there's a definitive difference. I think that if I've got a server and I want he or she to set the table, it's training. Okay. I want the silverware 1 inch from the bottom of the table. It's education when we start talking about the things that we've been talking about today, about what people need to understand how our business is run. The old days of saying to our department heads, you're responsible for this, but not giving them the financial responsibilities. They need to understand that decision that they make has a financial ramification. You need to educate them how and why and where, and whether it's the cost, what's that one knife cost, what's that cost of bringing in that extra server. It's not the $20 an hour, it's the $20 an hour plus benefit. It's going to equal X. So somebody says, oh my goodness, I kept that server today, it actually cost $30 an hour, and suddenly that person is saying at an 8-hour shift that just cost me $240 in payroll. They need to understand that, and that's where I say education. It's both. I think there's a definitive difference.
Not to be confused with my steak was overcooked, you need to take it back and have it redone. That's instinct. That's different from either of those two things.
Absolutely. That's somebody not doing their job in the kitchen, not checking.
Yeah. Okay.
As happened at the Marriott the other day when my hamburger was gray instead of red.
Yeah.
When you're sitting at a table, those people who are not in the food service industry, when you're sitting at your table and you're ordering your food and you just think it happened, well, it doesn't. It doesn't. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So it's that time of the show where I have to say thank you for coming, everyone. You can find us on YouTube. Type in virtual breakfast sessions. If you want to get in touch with Charles, contact either Fred or myself. We will put you in touch with him. He has a lot to say. He is a wealth of knowledge. He could help business. That leaves me with just 2 more things to say. Well, actually 3. I lied. See you in 2 weeks. The last 2 things are a constant. Everyone, stay positive, test negative, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Amen.
Bye now, folks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles.